Hi everyone, Dr. Hill here. I just wanted to go over the concept of leaky gut. This is something that comes up fairly frequently. If you think about things in terms of inflammation, increasing inflammation in the body, a lot of times this is what the conversation will ultimately end up going back to. Also, if you think about things such as food sensitivities, food allergies, this topic generally comes up as a part of that, so it's pretty important that we have a better understanding of what's actually going on when we're talking about a leaky gut, or more technically is termed intestinal hyperpermeability. So let me go through what's normal with you, and then I think it'll make it easier to understand what is actually abnormal when we talk about the leaky gut scenario. So when you consume food under normal circumstances, a couple of things are going to happen here. You consume that food and it goes through the esophagus, gets down into the stomach, starts getting broken down, and you get it down into the small intestine. And when we talk about the small intestine here, we're going to look at a couple of things that are going to regulate whether or not something actually gets absorbed or whether it's kept out of our internal system. So the way that that's going to work is you've got these cells in the gastrointestinal tract, and these cells normally stay nice and tight against each other. They have these proteins that we've linked in here in between them, and those proteins regulate how those cells open up and how they close back together. And the reason that becomes important is because you don't want everything to get into your body. So for example, let's say you accidentally ingested a bacteria. You don't want that bacteria crossing over into your body. Or in a more significant scenario, let's say you had a parasite. Well, you wouldn't want that parasite crossing over into your body. That's problematic. So under, again, normal circumstances here, if you're consuming carbohydrates are fairly small. A lot of these can easily cross across this barrier, not a real problem. Same thing with some of your fats. Your fats get absorbed across that barrier relatively easily, not a lot of difficulty. And your proteins will be accepted as well. They can either be transported through the cell or in between the cells. But the real idea here is that those proteins need to be broken down to a significant enough small size so that they don't cause a problem. And then on the back side of this up here, you've got your blood supply as well, and then immediately in that you're going to have, as part of your normal blood circulation, you're going to have your immune system cells within there. So that's a normal scenario, but basically really what it boils down to is that the cells are staying nice and tight against each other, and that the proteins that regulate how these cells stay in contact with each other or in close proximity to each other and how they open back up, those proteins are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, let's go with the abnormal scenario here. This is going to be your leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability again. What's going to happen is you've got a little bit of dysfunction that begins to take place, and a couple of things are going to be significant with this. In opposition to having these cells and these proteins functioning like they should under normal scenarios, what's going to happen in leaky gut is that the proteins that help maintain the integrity of the cells, that help maintain those cells against or in close proximity to each other, those cells become dysfunctional. And what's going to happen is that if the proteins in between the cells become dysfunctional, then you lose the ability to regulate the size of food. And a food that was once broken down small enough is now going to become a problem. Or even more significantly, let's say it's a bacteria that you've happened to have resident in the gastrointestinal tract. Now that bacteria has the ability to cross over and cause an immune reaction in the body as well. So what's going to happen is it's just going to leak in between those two cells because there's no regulation of the cells to be able to reduce the size of that gap in between them any longer. If this process becomes significant enough, if there's enough destruction in the gastrointestinal tract, what you'll see happen is that the proteins within the cells will begin to break down as well. And then you know that the cells are actually destroying themselves, or they're not destroying themselves, but they're being destroyed by the immune system. But the bottom line is it's not just an immune system reaction against the proteins between the cells, but it's also within the cells as well. Now the reason that that's important is, let's use our example with these proteins here per se, or we could even go with the bacteria component. What's going to happen is, because you've got your immune system cells circulating here, once this begins to leak through, these immune system cells are going to ultimately pick that up. And over time, the significance of that and how this ultimately results in inflammation throughout the rest of the body and also in terms of food sensitivities is if this is a bacteria, if it's a food that leaks through and your immune system tags that and it begins to react to it, then what it's going to inherently do is go on to cause that inflammatory process somewhere else. Because again, think about this being the blood supply, and that blood supply is going to happen throughout the entire body. That immune response is not happening at just the area of insult in the gastrointestinal tract, it's being carried throughout the rest of the body as well. So that's how you go from a localized problem in the gastrointestinal tract to having different complaints, again, whether it's sensitivities, allergies, or direct gut function. That's why it can go elsewhere, because it's not just isolated to the gastrointestinal tract because of the blood supply that's constantly moving throughout the body. So, an important thing you want to understand here, certainly, when we talk about diet, when we talk about some of the different lifestyle changes that we're looking at, trying to reduce your stress, improve your overall health, certainly this is one of the things that we're thinking about in the background. We want the gastrointestinal tract to be as healthy and as ideal as possible, and do as much as we can to ideally steer away from this leaky gut scenario, because we do know that there is a strong correlation there between leaky gut and other chronic healthcare conditions out there. So everything we can do to avoid that, definitely want to try to do. So, Dr. Arland Hill.